To hashtag Got Money. I'm Elizabeth Jackson. You know, Melanie and I from Southeast Lawyers were having a chat the other day about money, which we do quite often.
Something new and different.
Something new and unusual. And it kind of occurred to us that while it's very evident that we're in $87.5 billion worth of debt, which are projected for Australia, no one's really been talking about us locally here in Victoria. And Melanie and I decided that we would have to dig into this because obviously this is our home state. We love it here, and it's incredibly important to just start unwrapping that because it's interesting that it's not in the media. We're not seeing it. I think I saw my first article on it today, and it was at The Age. So what we've done is we've invited Louise Staley, who is the Shadow Minister for Economic Development and the member for Ripon. Hello, Louise. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, Elizabeth, and hello, Melanie. Very pleased to be here.
So, tell us, Louise, how much debt are we in? Where are we at? Because it feels like there might be a bit of a colossal avalanche of debt hanging over us that has not been considered. Do you like how I coined that, Melanie? Was that nice?
I think it's hard to, I think you're right that this is not talked about enough. So the debt now we think is about $50 billion in Victoria. Now, the reason we say we think is that we don't have the full accounts yet back from the 30th of June, and we wouldn't have them yet. They're not being hidden, they just haven't been released yet. So at 50.3 billion, and it's expected that that number will go up to 63.7 billion by the end of next year. Let me put that in context. That means Victoria's debt has tripled in 3 years. So that's largely the impact of COVID. There's no question about that. However, we were already on a trajectory to significantly increase our debt because of the big infrastructure projects that are being undertaken, and they're sort of due to be paid for. And so as a result, yes, we will be tripling our debt in 2 years. Now, what that means for every Victorian is that we already pay the highest taxes of any state, and it looks like there won't be any tax relief. And we might be able to come back to what that means for small business and business a bit later in our conversation. But it also means that it starts to put constraints on what we can spend money on. So in the future, now we've already seen the ratings agencies say, look, your debt's getting up there, and we want to put on notice, on watch, your ratings of AAA, which is as good as you can get, and it's really important to have that. So it really is, we're right up. We don't, the sort of words that they use is we don't have much headroom. Yes, that's right. Like the water is sort of, the water is here. Yeah.
So based on $60 billion and there being about 6 million Victorians, we're talking about $10,000 odd per Victorian that we owe. Are other states in this situation?
No, not on we will have the highest per capita debt by the time we get to the end of this, and they're not in the same position as us. Now, the thing about sort of government debt is that it works quite differently to household or business debt. So you would know that if you want to expand your business or buy a house, you have to have security. And you put up security, and the bank makes a decision about whether you've got enough security or not, and that's when they'll lend you the money or not. So with states and governments, it doesn't really work that way. You don't put up security. Your credit worthiness is your credit rating. So the credit rating agencies, and there's several of them, they're big global ratings agencies, make decisions on whether you're good for paying it back, pretty much. And the better your credit rating, the lower you can borrow money at. So the cheaper your money is. And so it's a virtuous circle on the way to AAA, which is where we are, but it's a vicious circle once you start losing your AAA credit rating, because you've got all the debt, and that's why you've lost your AAA, if that's what happens, and then it costs more to service it. So you're in a bind the other way. So it really is a constraint on what governments can do. So we are right at that point.
So in terms of paying off that debt and the money that Victoria raises to pay off that debt, we see things obviously like land tax and stamp duty. But could you explain to our listeners where else the state government gets funds on a year-to-year basis to pay for programs and debts?
Sure. So the state government gets, as you say, it gets about half of its money from taxes, and then it gets another third or so from the federal government. So the federal government provides grants. Some of those are tied grants, so they have to be used for health, or they have to be used to build a certain road, and some of them are untied, and that's Victoria's share of the GST. So we get a share of the GST, and all of the GST that's raised is returned back to the states, but it's not. All states fight about how much we get of that, shall we say, and Victoria always feels we don't get enough because we don't, right?
I like how she did that, because we don't.
Well, no, we don't. I've heard that before.
Yeah. So we have never, in the history of federation, like since 1901, we have been a net payer. So we never get $1 back. You know, we put the dollar in, but we don't get $1 back.
Well, that seems unfair.
Look, New South Wales and Victoria are the two donor states, and so if you get a Western Australian on your program, they'll say they're very hard done by, and all you need to say is, well, what about those 8 decades where we subsidised you?
I love it. I love it.
So anyway, but back to your question. That's where we get the final remainder is from sales of goods and services. So the states run some businesses and do some other things like that. The other source of money is selling assets, and so Victoria sold its electricity assets and a lot of assets back in the 80s and the 90s, after we'd had the Kane-Kearney years and we were bankrupt. But this government, the current government, sold the Port of Melbourne for about $9.5 billion. And there, to be honest, there isn't a lot left to sell. So that isn't an area for us to sort of get more money to pay off this debt.
They also, in our industry, they've been talking about how the Land Titles Office, the land registry, has now been leased on a long-term lease to generate more income from that. So in your average year, forgetting COVID, etc., how much money does the state government have coming through, just roughly, from the things we've just discussed?
70 billion.
70 billion, okay. So we can see that we've got a bit of a, how are we going to pay?
But we spend all that, right? So
yes.
So we spend, you know, like, so last year, for example, from the 1st of July to the 31st of December, Victoria ran a deficit in that period. So that's pre-COVID, that's, you know, pre any of these problems. And so we were already, again, to talk about the water lapping, if the idea is to run at least a balanced budget so that you are sort of only spending what you're getting, we had sort of tipped out of that. Now, only just, I may add, and and I don't expect us to run a balanced budget now, not during COVID. We can't, nobody expects that, and we shouldn't be. This is absolutely the time to be spending money. But where we end up at the end is with a lot of debt and not a lot of levers to move in terms of where you could put the taxes up or where you could cut services, really, because, the states spend most of their money on health, education, transport, and police. So they're not things that you can cut. They're things that Victorians need and expect.
So how do we pay this money back?
It is not going to be easy, Elizabeth, to be honest.
That's not an answer.
Is there a plan?
I think the government has a plan, and some of that is because they're in the mire of COVID at the moment. And I think we expect a plan in terms of getting out of the debt mountain when the budget comes down. So the budget will come down in October, and part of that will be they'll account for all of the money they've spent so far, sort of through this period. But that's also when you put the forward estimates out for the next 4 years, and every Victorian should expect that will include the plan to start stabilising and then eventually paying off this debt. There's no easy way around this, to be honest. It is going to take a great deal of fiscal discipline, and you're right, we need to start with a plan. We need to see that so that we can then, as a community, or me and the opposition, can make decisions about whether we think that's the right plan or whether we should have a different plan. So that's our next step.
Where are we getting all of this money?
That's what I want to know. That's it. Where are we getting this money? That is okay. Where? Because who has pockets that deep?
Right. So the international bond market is the answer to that.
Oh. I thought it was going to be far more exciting than that.
Yeah, I know.
We're getting it from an international drug dealer, and his name is Javier. Anything else?
No. That's, remember back in the 70s where there was that plan to borrow, the Whitlam government was going to borrow money from Kemlani or something? Well, no, it's not like that.
Okay.
We have asked this question very directly, and the answer that we got back was that all of the money that is being raised, this huge amount of debt, is being raised through Treasury Corp Victoria, which is the organisation within government that runs the debt, if you like. They're separate to government itself. They deal with the international markets, they issue bonds, and they're the ones that go out to the market both domestically, so the big superannuation funds would buy those bonds, or internationally. And the sort of people buying them internationally would be sovereign wealth funds, big international investors. These are traded instruments, and this is why, though, where the credit rating matters. So what these bonds cost to issue depends on our credit rating. There's not a sort of running out of money idea, but there's certainly a money getting too expensive is sort of the way to think about it.
You sound, Louise, to me like you're the opposite side of the parliament to Daniel Andrews.
Yep.
But you're not objecting to his spending, it sounds like you're all working together in solidarity. Is that fair?
what we've said is that we understand that COVID is a time where you have to spend money. You do have to support Victorians, you need to support Victorian businesses, and you clearly need to spend money in the health system. So we have, in fact, we put out in May a document called Back to Work and Back in Business, which was sort of our ideas, or is our ideas, on how we think we should get out of this. And that includes spending some significant amounts of money. So we're not opposed to any money being spent. What we say is, firstly, everybody needs to know what it's being spent on. It needs to be accounted for. But secondly, we need to have decision-making that is prudent around this. You can't just throw money. It does have to have some plans around it. So I think you're right in saying that we agree money needs to be spent during the pandemic. Where I have been very critical, and I continue to be very critical, is the degree of money that we were already racking up prior to COVID. So, we were already massively increasing our spending, and this got nothing to do with COVID. It's because a lot of these projects, like, for example, North East Link, that project, when it started, was meant to be, I think, $5.5 billion. It's now over 16.
Ooh.
So there's just no cost control on these massive projects, and that's one of the reasons we have so much debt. And that to us is entirely unacceptable. We're not opposed to the projects, but we completely say that they need to be managed properly, because as Melanie did the calculation, you end up with every Victorian owing $10,000 of debt because we couldn't get on top of how we build our projects properly.
So
can I just ask this real quick? There's a huge conversation currently around homelessness, and I know this is a curly one. I'm just throwing this on the table so we can all have a look at it. And we've managed to find temporary housing for homelessness in the pandemic, which has been incredible. It feels counterintuitive to house those people in the interim and then send them out to the streets. Is there a plan in place with state government to actually rehouse these people more permanently and more long term?
I think in aggregate the answer is no, although I have seen some announcements that will go around the edges of doing that. Homelessness, as you say, look, it is a really complex and difficult issue. It's also underfunded. I agree, underfunded. But it is also difficult. There are multiple drivers of what makes somebody homeless, and some of those drivers I think we sort of fail to deal with easily, and the other that we could just do better on. And then at the other end, we have these huge public housing waiting lists that in many ways are just not real. Like, a lot of those people are never going to get public housing, and we should be thinking much more carefully about whether it's women fleeing family violence, or whether it's people coming out of mental health episodes, even, could I say, people coming out of prison should be given short-term help to get into, to get re-established, if you like, but with an expectation that they won't be in public housing for decades. Yet that's sort of been the model, if you like. So I do think that, and I am by no means an expert on public housing or housing. These are sort of I look at it, I think, as we all do, and just sort of say, can't we do better here?
That's good. That's enough. And I'm glad you said that. There was an article, somebody was talking about it last night on TV, and I thought, yeah, that's I feel passionately that we're such a wealthy country. You know, we were talking to Nikki Hutley a couple of weeks ago, and she said, look, it's 30% of our GDP. She said, if it was you know, we can swim this, well, this will be fine for us, for Australia. And then I leave my house and down the road, there's a guy sleeping on a park bench. It feels counterintuitive to who we are as a nation.
So I think the next big question is, yes, we understand where we get the money from. There's a rate that we have to pay it back.
I can tell you what that that rate is. I have so the 10-year bond rate as at 30th of June, so close enough, was 1.31%.
Oh, gee, that's good.
So, interest rates are very low at the moment. The cash rate at the moment from the Reserve Bank is 0.25%. By comparison, Japanese interest rates have been negative for nearly a decade.
So we are issuing bonds, as you said, say for a 10-year period. So we have 10 years to pay them back. What happens if we don't pay them back? We can't pay them back at the end of that period.
So the ratings agencies, when they rate either a state or a nation, they make an assessment about how likely we are to be able to pay them back. And so we're currently AAA. That tells the world that we will pay them back. We will absolutely pay back the bonds. The way we do that is if we're slowly reducing our debt, it will depend on sort of the when bonds become due. But the most usual way of paying things back is that you get to the end of them and you issue slightly more or slightly less, depending on whether you're still increasing your debt or reducing it. So that's how you do it.
So you borrow money to pay back debt so that you can borrow more money.
Yeah, just what Dad taught me. That's how Dad taught me to run my check. Yeah, if you just borrow it from Jim. Louise, thank you for joining us. I wish I could, honestly, I could speak to you all day. I think Melanie could too.
And I to both of you. This is 26. This is great.
We've only got 26 minutes and I think there's another show in this. I really do. You know, I just want to end by saying we really appreciate that you're all working together on this. It's very evident. You know, in government, there's always some kind of pushing and pulling, and we haven't had a sense of that from the outside. There's a real reverence to that because we are looking on the outside looking in. So thank you. We acknowledge both sides of the house and we thank them for their respect in managing this beautifully. Melanie, do you want to finish with anything with Louise?
No, I think I'm good. I'm going to go back and set some more questions, and we're going to
re-question you, Louise. This has been good. God bless everybody. Be safe out there. We'll be thinking about you. If you need anything, please come through the Got Money team. Obviously, if you've got any questions for Louise, please email them through to Got Money, and we'll certainly forward them to Louise by email. And the same goes to Melanie, our right-on solicitor for Got Money. She will answer any question as long as there's a buck and a bear in it. Take care, everyone. God bless and all the best.